Today on Seculo, Biden stashed classified documents in Chinatown.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
Hey, welcome to Seculo, folks. We've got news, and this occurred on Tuesday. Did not get a lot of coverage, obviously, because of the news involving President Trump, but we wanted to spend time on it today. This comes out of the House Oversight Committee, which is led by Chairman Comer, the Congressman Comer, and they had a sit-down interview that they did with Kathy Chung. Now, she was the executive assistant to Vice President Biden, and she was actually in charge of moving the boxes and packing up the boxes, some of which did contain classified records from his time as vice president. So these were the ones that stayed around Washington, D.C., not the ones that dated back to the time in his U.S. Senate. And that we learned from her that these boxes that were found at Penn Biden Center last November, first, were not in a locked closet like the White House previously said. So they weren't just in a place where only a few people may have had access to a key with this locked closet, or you'd have to break in to get into the documents. But in fact, that they were just in a closet. Nothing special there, nothing locked. But we also learned that it wasn't just documents that were put at the Penn Biden Center, because that didn't open up that office until later. So we learned that they were in an office that was near the White House that was rented out by the vice president after he left office. 2, an office in Chinatown. Now, we don't know, this is in Chinatown in Washington, D.C. Now, what we don't know about that is what office in Chinatown or whose office in Chinatown, but this is all new information as well. And, of course, eventually these documents got to the Penn Biden Center. They were actually transported using people's personal vehicles, not by National Archives, not by the Secret Service, not by the FBI, not by any kind of government agency, but they were then taken out of these 2 other offices, the office that was rented near the White House and the new office we've learned about in Chinatown, taken by a private vehicle when the Penn Biden office opened up, but they were not put behind a locked closet. That's what she testified to. And this is his former executive assistant under oath. She went on to tell the House Oversight Committee team that interviewed her that the story about when the White House counsel asked her, this is the current White House counsel at the time, now Biden is president, to go get the documents, was not in November of 2022. That's what we were told by the White House. And that's what was represented by President Biden's own attorneys, was that, we found these documents in November, and we made sure we reported it to National Archives, and there's nothing to see here. But, of course, then we learned the FBI started not doing what they did to, of course, President Trump. They wouldn't call it a raid, but it was pretty close to that, spending 12 hours at Joe Biden's home in Delaware, going to his beach house, finding more classified documents at the home in Delaware. What we know on top of this, though, is that this actually started as early as May of 2022. So the Biden team knew they had a classified documents problem in May. Not November, but they kept it from the public, and it looks like they also kept it from law enforcement. We're going to take your calls on this at 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. This is, again, has not been widely reported because there was so much news coverage, rightfully so, of President Trump's arraignment and then his speech following the arraignment and kind of the fallout from that. But we're going to take, and all the politics around that, we're going to take your calls on this as well. And we've got Mike Pompeo. He's our senior counsel. He's going to be joining us. He just got back from Ukraine. He met with President Zelensky. He's going to update us on what he thinks is the best path forward for America there. So I think it's going to be very interesting because he was actually in Ukraine, traveling around the country, meeting with its leaders so that we know what's best for American interest as well. Join the broadcast. Give us a call. 1-800-684-3110 and support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. Be part of our matching challenge this month.
we found out that Biden houses classified documents in Chinatown. Guess who Biden told to put his classified documents in Chinatown? Hunter's old assistant, Kathy Chung. Kathy Chung works for the Pentagon. You ready? Why is someone named Kathy Chung, who works for the Defense Department, moving Joe Biden's classified documents to Chinatown?
Some of the documents were placed at yet another temporary address, this time in D.C.'s Chinatown neighborhood, before traveling to the Penn Biden think tank in D.C., which, of course, paid Biden $900,000 after the think tank accepted donations, millions, from China.
The White House then came back and said, yeah, that happened in November, December of 2022. She just testified under oath that it happened in May of 2022. So there are more questions today than we've ever had.
Which means Biden ordered the Trump raid knowing he had documents spread eagle all over Chinatown, plus his unlocked garage. Not only was he not cooperating by not turning them over, but he had his lawyers and his assistants running around town to bury them before the midterms.
These documents were transported from the vice presidency, from his office to the private sector, in private cars. Mm-hmm. They went to at least 3 different locations initially, one of which was in Chinatown, the other of which was in the Penn Biden Center, which we're finding more and more evidence that it was almost exclusively funded by China.
We thought the garage was bad, but Joe managed to outdo himself, didn't he? Isn't there a word for this?
How that could possibly happen. How anyone could be that irresponsible.
All the things that that the special prosecutors apparently going to try to indict Trump on mishandling classified documents, Biden did, and he did it about 10 times worse.
All right, folks, remember, we'll take your calls at 1-800-684-3110. This new information on President Biden, the documents, and that he knew about it in May of 2022, and certainly his White House counsel team knew about these documents, and didn't. Of course, they acted like they didn't find out about it until November of 2022, but it looks like they knew in May, and they had Mar-a-Lago raided in September. So we'll take calls on that. We'll get into more of that at 1-800-684-3110. But we're joined right now by our senior counsel for global affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Just got back from Ukraine. Secretary Pompeo, I want to go first to you on this. You were in Ukraine this week. Tell our listeners what you were doing there and what you saw, what you learned.
Well, thanks, Jordan. I was there. I got to spend an entire day. I took a group of American business leaders and some great Christian relief organizations that have been doing good work on the ground there, E3 Solutions and Samaritan's Purse, people will be familiar with, who are trying to help through this enormous humanitarian crisis. We got a chance to visit Irpin, where, of course, we have a town that was destroyed from the attacks from Vladimir Putin. And then we met with Ukrainian business people and the Ukrainian government leadership, trying to figure out how it is we can best help them secure their sovereignty, their freedom, their independence in a way that's consistent with America. What are the things that matter to America? How can we, as business leaders, folks who are no longer in government service, do that? And trying to understand what were the tools they actually needed that can prevent Vladimir Putin from controlling not only Ukraine, but eventually more of Europe as well.
You know, you met with, and we put the image up on the screen for people watching our broadcast. You met with President Zelensky as well while you were there. It seemed like we got into a bit of a stalemate situation over the winter. What do the leaders there think is going to happen once this is it going? Are we going to see again this we get into a second year of war, and we're into the springtime? Is it going to be that all-out war that we saw just restarting again? I mean, what is their feeling?
So it's definitely a nasty conflict where the lines are, people are exchanging meters of terrain, right? Yards of terrain. A stalemate is a reasonable description of that. But of course, each side is trying to make sure they have the industrial capability to do what they need and the military ability to do what they need. President Zelensky was pretty clear. I met with 300 Ukrainian students, remarkable young people. It's interesting, Jordan, they were never part of the Soviet Union. They don't get it. When Putin says, no, you're part of us, they grew up at a different time. It's just never been part of their lives. And they are determined. And all they've asked for is American stuff. And, the thing is, if we don't do that, if we don't help them be successful, they're going to, I think, work to build out a counteroffensive over the coming months to retake a significant piece of the land in Ukraine. If we don't help them, if we don't continue to provide support, behind the Europeans who need to do this in the first instance, it'll end up costing American families even more, not just taxpayer money to prevent this from happening in Finland or Moldova or Estonia, but even more importantly, we all know that Vladimir Putin, in charge of the red winter wheat that moves through the Black Sea, of Ukrainian factories, of all the important commercial operations inside of Ukraine, that's a bad thing for every family in the United States, and we ought to continue to provide the tools they need to ultimately claim victory against Vladimir Putin.
It does seem, Secretary Pompeo, one of the issues has been that the Biden administration is not totally clear in communicating their goals, strategies, how they see this even possibly coming to an end. And so the American people, I think rightfully so, they question, it's not the idea that we don't want to stop Putin and we want to support the Ukrainian people. Like you said, it was, I think, great to point out that you met with students who never experienced life in the Soviet Union or life under Russian control. This idea that Putin talks about, this is part of us. They never had that. But like that kind of communication isn't made clearly by our current leaders. So what could they do differently to kind of, I think, re-engage the American public on why this is so important?
George, you're absolutely right. The American people have a right to have answers and to get clarity from this government, from our government. And the Biden administration has just tragically failed in explaining why it matters, what we're actually doing, why we're doing it. And they could do better at that. The second thing is they've been so timid. I think had they provided the resources at the front end, you remember all the debates about are we going to send medium-range stuff, short-range stuff. Had we done this at the front end, this could be over. They could have crushed Putin at a moment of a maximal weakness, and they didn't. Instead, they were so afraid that they were going to provoke and already provoked Vladimir Putin that this extended. And the humanitarian stuff that you saw on the ground, I mean, Jordan, you've been to these places in your life too. You see these families that lost everything, and they've now lost a brother or a father or a grandpa. I mean, it's just absolutely a human tragedy that could have been avoided with American power being used in a way that did the deterrence that we achieved there for 4 years. That's the tragedy of what has happened, and the answer to that tragedy is clarity to the American people. Why does it matter here? And providing them the things they need now to end this conflict, to convince Vladimir Putin that the cost of continuing his invasion of Ukraine and the death and destruction of Ukrainian innocents exceeds the benefit. That's the model. That's what Biden should go. You should go to the Oval Office. You give a primetime address explaining why it is we're doing what we're doing and demanding that the Europeans do more at the same time.
I think that's what's been missing here. I mean, we missed that opportunity, like you said early on, to deter this from ever happening. And I think if it was a different administration, it was the administration you were serving in, it wouldn't have happened when you were Secretary of State. That deterrence would have been put in place so that the conflict never occurred. But then now we have to deal with the reality that the conflict is now entering its second year, and the U.S. is very involved, and people want to see at least a plan on how it comes to a conclusion. So, again, a lot of this is communications to the American people, and then, of course, the communication to the world. I want to turn to the reports this week on, the Chinese spy balloon. We haven't talked about it yet on the broadcast this week, that it was able to intercept signals, intelligence, and communications from U.S. military bases, and so it kind of confirmed what we had feared, that it was getting this kind of intel that they had not been able to get before. Is this another failed test? I mean, is it seems like one of the bigger failures of the Biden administration?
Jordan, I must say, when I heard this week that now it's pretty clear they did surveil us with this balloon, right? The administration said we didn't shoot it down, but that's okay because we had this thing jammed, we had this prevented. It's all good, nothing to see here, folks. This turns out to have been at least wrong and maybe a lie. And we now know that they did surveil us. And the Biden administration should be clear about what they collected, why they collected it. They have this thing. They should show the American people what they did. All of this matters because the Biden administration's weakness is going to continue to drive Communist Party aggression from China. And that's for every American family. That's a big deal. And the fact that they misled the American public and said, Montana, Kansas, Iowa, wherever this damn thing flew over, our biggest, most important military sites in America, don't worry, we have this all under control, proved false. And I promise you, the Chinese Communist Party knew it was false when the Biden administration was saying it. And now, what an embarrassment to the world. The people watching this from all across the world are going to trust the Biden administration even less. It's the damnedest thing. This deterrence model that we built for 4 years is now fundamentally broken, and the risk of a series of cascading crises is even greater.
Well, I was going to turn to another one. I mean, we see China at the heart of all of these. China brokering deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran, China brokering a deal with Russia, and now I went to Taiwan. So the president of Taiwan was in California. Speaker McCarthy hosted the president, and we've got, of course, the comments from the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, denouncing this meeting, threatening this meeting. But the bigger picture is, how do we get ahead of China on the Taiwan issue so that the deterrence is there that should have been in Ukraine as well, so that that conflict, which you said it was like a very dangerous cascading world right now, doesn't just one day we wake up to the news and, oh, now China's invading Taiwan?
Well, Joe, and I was happy that Speaker McCarthy met with the Taiwanese leader in California at the Reagan Library. What a powerful message to send about the Reagan model of peace through strength, and we win, you lose. Now is time for all. By the way, it was bipartisan. That's fantastic and important too. Now's the time to actually not shortchange the actual tasks that need to have. What does that mean? That means building a military that is capable, not based on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? This means building a military that isn't concerned about climate change, but rather on defeating our adversaries, empowering the Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, folks in the East and further south in the Pacific, the Australians and the Pacific Islanders, empowering them to, in the first instance, take the lead in confronting the Chinese at Taiwan. But it's very, very clear. The Chinese Communist Party will use this moment to begin to blockade, to inspect ships. They're talking about that already, stopping commercial traffic in international waters, boarding ships. This is a very dangerous precedent, and this would be the precursor to an invasion of Taiwan. We're going to have to put assets there. We're going to have to help these other countries build out their strength, and we're going to have to get the Taiwanese the tools and systems they need to do precisely what Ukraine has been able to do, defend their own sovereignty. I'm confident the people of Taiwan will fight for that, and we need to do the things we can to support them so we can keep America safe and strong and prosperous as well.
Secretary Pompeo, we appreciate everything, all the insight as well. Our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, we appreciate you joining us just after returning from Ukraine. I think that's where the American people are, is, one, we want to be there for deterrence. We don't want to see conflict when it can be prevented. And if we can use assets that America has to help prevent those conflicts, which build up, also show American strength, that's great. But then when we fail to do that, and then we get caught into, second year in Ukraine, people, rightfully so, they get concerned. And I see that in the comments on Rumble. I see your comments. I understand that. I mean, that's why we're talking to Secretary Pompeo about how do we move forward. We'll be right back on Secular.
In my time in service, both as the CI director and the Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN, overseas with the European Court of Justice, is incredibly important.
We have on our team lawyers, non-lawyers as well, that are policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We have been focused on protecting the nation state of Israel, particularly before the United Nations.
We don't shy away from the battles that are going on at the UN and just complain about them. We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
The risk of an incomplete or unsolid relationship between the United States of America and Israel is real.
Israel is very important to the ACLJ, and we will always fight for Israel's rights.
We had a series of cases at the European Court of Human Rights, primarily dealing with religious liberty.
And as Secretary of State, I saw this too. Nations that had more religious freedom were on firmer footing. They had better democracies.
America has always been the world leader in religious liberties, in freedom of conscience and freedom of speech.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith and others that are having their rights abused.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to keep the battle going when it's not cool anymore. when it's not the number one story on TV. You have to actually be committed to finding it out, or else you'll never win.
The ACLJ's front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to aclj.org today. That's aclj.org.
To Secular. We are taking your calls to 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. I want to spend a little bit more time on this new information that we're getting from the House Oversight Committee and Chairman Comer, because the team there interviewed Joe Biden's President Biden's former executive assistant, Kathy Chung. She's now at a top assistant to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin. So she's still inside the U.S. government, but she came and put forth testimony that, in fact, what we had been reported was not true about where these classified documents, specifically the ones from his time as vice president. So the ones that left his White House office or the vice presidential office and then ended up at the Penn Biden Center. But what about the time before the Penn Biden Center was even there? Well, she let us know some interesting information. Once those documents got to the Penn Biden Center, and by the way, they were transported by people's private vehicles, like if you and I just drove our car with classified documents in them, that brings up a whole host of issues. They weren't behind any kind of locked special closet. She said that wasn't accurate, that statement that was going out there from the Biden team. We also know that the Biden attorneys called her in May, not November, in May, to start getting these documents and boxes together. So that part of the timeline was inaccurate. That's important as well. But we also know that before there was even a Penn Biden Center, that the documents were in an office that they had rented out near the White House. And then now, Andy, we're learning about a second office in Chinatown. We have no information other than the office was in Chinatown in Washington, D.C. We don't know whose office it was.
Very appropriate.
Yeah, right.
Very appropriate to be in Chinatown in Washington, D.C. for Biden. But, I mean, we now know that, first of all, they lied about the time frame. It wasn't November. It was May. And 3 different locations, someplace in the White House, someplace in Chinatown, and eventually at the Penn Biden Center. But this really brings up some real serious issues, because the issue is the secrecy and the importance of these documents cannot be underestimated, Jordan. These are sensitive documents. These are, in some cases, top secret documents. We don't know where they were. They were in his car. They were in an office next to his house. They were in a closet. They were there. They were everywhere. But the president claims people know I'm real serious about sensitive documents and classified documents. I remember he said that. Who? What people? People know. Why didn't you identify who people? No, people know that you're not that serious about these documents, and these could contain information that is seriously, possibly destructive to the security of the United States. And here, they're hither and yon all over the place.
Yeah, but here's President Biden talking about it. He did very little interviews about this, but did talk about it. Let's play it.
People know I take classified documents and classified information seriously. When my lawyers were clearing out my office at the University of Pennsylvania, they set up an office for me, secure office in the Capitol. The 4 years after being vice president, I was a professor at Penn. They found some documents in a box in a locked cabinet, or at least a closet.
So now, see, he even prefaced it there. It got widely reported that it was a locked closet, but he called it right there. He kind of let us know, actually. It was never behind his attorneys wanted us to believe it was behind a locked closet, and then they just stumbled upon them in November. But they knew about it in May. And I want to play this from Chairman Comer, then we'll take some of your calls, 1-800-684-3110, about the location. Let's play by 4.
One of the locations was in Chinatown. Another location was in the Penn Biden Center, which might as well have been Chinatown by looking at where their money was coming from. And that the White House has never been honest with the American people. Remember, we never would have found out about this in March of 2023 if someone hadn't leaked it to the press that Biden was mishandling classified documents. So the White House then came back and said, yeah, that happened in November, December of 2022. She just testified under oath that it happened in May of 2022.
So, I mean, you got dates that were inaccurate and reported. You got attorneys who were giving inaccurate information, President Biden's attorneys, about even how they were stored. And now we have a special counsel investigating it. But I want to go to the phones. David in Iowa, online too. Hey, David, welcome to Seculo.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I could talk to you guys for hours probably. Yeah, I'm a truck driver out here, and you know we're just dumb old truck drivers. But it seems to me that more of the American people are a lot smarter than what the government stooges like to give us credit for. So what I'm understanding is that this whole raid on Mar-a-Lago was kind of set up to be a big distraction so they could spread out and clear out and get their ducks in a row, but kind of got caught before they got it all there.
That is what it's starting to look like, David. I mean, listen, this whole legal strategy, by the way, you truck drivers, you're not dumb. You're the backbone of our country, the backbone of our entire infrastructure, and we all appreciate the work that you do, the hard work that you do away from your families and your children to get us the goods and the services and the supplies we need so that we can live our lives and have the products we want. So thank you. I know it's been a tough time for truck drivers out there during these COVID years and supply chain issues. So I appreciate your work. I know we got a lot of truckers listening to the broadcast. You guys are smart because you do follow the news closely. And Andy, that's exactly what it looks like. One, they were creating a legal pile-on for President Trump. We saw it in New York this week. We know about the special counsel in Mar-a-Lago, the raid in Mar-a-Lago. But what we do know now is that not only did they know in November that they had classified documents, which made it look like they found them after the raid on Mar-a-Lago, which was September. They knew about it in May, and they still okayed and let the Attorney General okay a raid on the former president's home.
Well, I agree with the caller in terms of him saying that it's a distraction from what happened at Mar-a-Lago, because this is, it seems to me, just, a way of diverting the public's attention. It's not going to work. From what happened with the classified documents that Biden had hither and yon and all over the place. And so what we do is we again attack President Trump. We go to his house. We get a warrant from a judge who issues it, who should not have issued it because he was conflicted out, having recused himself from another case involving Donald Trump, but he issues the warrant nevertheless. They go into the man's house. They rumble through all the papers that he's got. And what we do is we concentrate on that, but then we downplay and soft play what happened to Joe Biden and his use of the papers or misuse of the papers until Kathy Chung, the executive assistant to him, comes up and says, it didn't happen in December. It happened in May. The papers were all over the place. So, yes, and to Jordan's point, you're not a dumb old truck driver. You're the backbone of America. You're out there working in the heart of America, and I salute you. But this is a distraction, and you've got this analysis perfectly right.
We're going to continue to take your phone calls at 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We've also got a new report. Rick Riddell is going to be joining us in the second half hour about how the ACLJ is fighting back on some of the, we see the weaponization of government agencies. It's not just at the federal level, even at the county level. Maricopa County, in fact, where we filed what in that state in Arizona is like their Freedom of Information Act request off of some information from the former AG candidates' campaign team about what may have been on and what might be on a whiteboard in Maricopa County about, watching Twitter accounts that may be, anti-American or spreading, as you know, disinformation. So we're going to talk about that with Rick Riddell and take more of your phone calls about the documents in Chinatown. 1-800-684-3110. Support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. The ACLJ has a 30-plus year history of fighting on behalf of you, our members, in support of life,
abortion's murder,
religious liberty.
A Turkish court has freed American pastor Andrew Brunson.
Justice, personal freedom, and constitutional government. Our freedoms are under attack. Now, more than ever.
We are not going back. Abortion is okay.
Yet another week of violence.
They use their power and influence to push deeply un-American causes that threaten to destroy our country. Abortion on demand, socialism, inflation, cancel culture, weakness in the face of our adversaries. We owe it to our kids and grandkids to defend the things that make this country great. It's time to take the gloves off and uphold American values. Go to acljaction.org to learn more.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. And now your host, Jordan Seculo.
All right, welcome back to Seculo. We are taking your phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. So we have new information. And this is interesting because, see, when you get special counsels, I think this whole thing is absurd, having 3 special counsels out there, because really they're using the idea of a special counsel to investigate Biden's classified documents as a justification to indict Donald Trump on something else. I mean, I don't ignore that. Don't think New York is the end of it. It's just the beginning of what I think is this legal pile-on of cases that might not go anywhere, but certainly take resources. I mean, you got to have legal teams. You got to have people representing you, your staffs. You're going to be on the campaign trail. You already are on the campaign trail. So all these issues at play. But when there are special counsels out there, your former staff as vice president for Vice President Biden, who is still in the administration as a top assistant to the Secretary of Defense, when they're called in to testify to the Oversight Committee, which is now led by Republicans and Chairman Comer, they are not going to hold back the truth. They're not going to get in legal trouble with the special counsel out there and defend, because the dates were wrong, or this idea that these documents were in a locked cabinet at the Penn Biden Center, when in fact they were not in a locked cabinet or locked closet. They were just in a cabinet or closet that anyone could have had access to that was in the Penn Biden Center. I want to go to Andy Kahneman on this because, Andy, we're learning the dates were wrong. We now know definitively the Biden team, including his White House lawyers and private attorneys, knew back in May, so before the September Mar-a-Lago raid, that they had this classified documents problem.
That's exactly right. And, we're talking about a difference in 6-7 months in which they knew. And I'm shocked that they didn't tell us the truth. I can't hardly believe it that they didn't tell us the truth, that these documents were not kept in a one location spot, but were spread all over the place in Washington, D.C. 3 locations, near the White House, an office in Chinatown, eventually the Penn Biden Center. And it takes an investigative committee headed by in the House of Representatives by a Republican chairman, Comer from Kentucky, who then brings in a top assistant to Biden, now with Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who does what? She tells the truth. She's not going to lie to Congress. She comes in and she says they weren't in one location. They were all over the place. And then Biden is trying to tell us, people know I take these documents seriously. He said that. I heard him. If you were listening to the program, you heard him too. And I keep saying, what people? I don't. I don't think anybody who listens to this program doesn't believe that you know that. So, it's a distraction from the President Trump situation is another distraction. You don't hear the media, the mainstream media focusing on the documents. No, they want to talk about an indictment, which, as I said yesterday, and I repeat again, does not charge a crime under the law of any jurisdiction.
I want to play this soundbite. This is President Biden talking to Scott Pelley, 60 Minutes. In September, after the Mar-a-Lago raid. Remember, his team had not announced yet that they had a classified documents problem. But they did know it. We now know they knew it in May. But listen to what President Biden had to say in his criticism of former President Trump.
When you saw the photograph of the top secret documents laid out on the floor at Mar-a-Lago, what did you think to yourself, looking at that image?
How that could possibly happen. How anyone could be that irresponsible. I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that I mean names of people who helped, or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
Okay. I think, first of all, we know he was more irresponsible now. His weren't even in a locked closet, which people could have had a key to. And we know in Mar-a-Lago, they had special locks on it for all the documents to be protected, and it had just happened. He had just left the White House, President Trump, so they had still, going through it. It was quick leave. So figure out what's in these boxes. And they were working with the National Archives, and all of a sudden there was a raid. That was after they said, hey, will you put this extra security in, put these cameras in? None of that was at President Biden's office. We'll take your calls, 1-800-684-3110. Support the work of the ACLJ. Donate today at aclj.org. Be part of our matching challenge. Back with Rick Riddell.
When we see something, when we hear something, when we're concerned about an issue, we don't just talk about it. We do something about it. And that goes to our Government Accountability Project.
If we allow leaders in Washington, D.C. to make decisions behind closed doors, unaccountable to the people, then we are going to get skewed and corrupt decisions.
There are lots of other places that do lots of important work for America, but the ACLJ has taken up a lane which is irreplaceable.
The Freedom of Information Act, that's a statute that allows us to get information from the government. It starts with a letter from our offices in Washington to these agencies. And it says, give us this information on these topics. And generally, they don't. And then we go to court.
We go through a series of lengthy negotiations back and forth about what they'll give or what they won't give. We may get tons of information that's redacted, and we have to then go back and say, you redacted too much. We can't really find out what you're giving us because it makes no sense. So it goes through a process of litigation.
That is how you get information, and that office is going to be more active now more than ever.
The ACLJ has been extremely active in vigorously seeking to hold these bureaucrats accountable. We have filed hundreds of FOIA requests. We have received over 20,000 pages of documents in our litigation.
Holding them accountable, holding the Biden administration accountable so that all Americans are able to have faith in their government.
We will up our efforts. We will not stop.
You're finding a nugget in a gold mine. Occasionally you'll come up with something that is really a bombshell, but you have to persist in doing it, and that's what we do.
That's a little bit of what we do through our Office of Government Accountability, and of course that comes under our Office of Government Affairs. So your support of the ACLJ supports all of that.
Welcome back to Secular. We're taking your phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. Rick Riddell is joining us. Of course, Rick was the acting director of national intelligence and a senior advisor to us at the ACLJ on national security foreign policy issues, as well as some of the weaponization of politics here in our country. And on Friday, Rick had texted my dad and me about a situation in Arizona. And we do a lot of FOIA work, as you know, and usually that's at the federal level, the Freedom of Information Act request. But your states have, most states have a similar process you can go through if there are open records laws or sunshine laws. And in Arizona's case, it's the Arizona Public Records Law and the Arizona Public Records Act. And Rick, what happened is you saw a tweet. It's one of your friends, Abe Habana, who was running for Attorney General in Arizona, someone we supported and were endorsing as the Seculos. For Attorney General. His team is still working there on some of the voter issues that were plaguing specifically Maricopa County. And they tweeted out that the Maricopa County Board of Elections, their elections department, had a war room with a whiteboard dedicated towards, quote, dangerous and misinformation. And it had a list, or has a list, of Arizona Twitter users on it. So basically, who to target, and this is the County Board of Elections. So you text us and said, hey, is there something we can do here to see if these records still exist or if the whiteboard still exists? I said, let me text Ben Sisney from our legal team, Rick, and see if what Maricopa County Board of Elections would fall under. Well, today, Rick, we sent out the records request to Maricopa County and the Arizona Public Records, under the Arizona Public Records Act, to get to the bottom of this.
What's so amazing is to be a part of the ACLJ because we take action. We don't just sit around and complain. But when we see a problem like this in Maricopa County, where the government is creating a list of people to do something to, I mean, that's the big question here, Jordan. What did they do to these people? When the government feels like you have dissenting information that is exposing them or challenging their belief, they should not create a list of people to target. What does this mean? Are they going to be audited? Was this list turned over to the comms people to say, make sure reporters are harassing these people? It is not the government's job to silence people who are dissenting from their viewpoint. What we have in this country right now is an incredible problem of the government saying that you, with your comments, are pushing disinformation, and so we have the authority to shut you down. Maybe to cancel you, maybe to audit you, maybe to get rid of your banking privileges. We don't know how far they go, but when the government creates an account, a list of people that says you are bad for challenging us, and we're going to call it misinformation, we all know it's just dissenting information. It's different information than what the government wants you to be saying.
Yeah, I mean, what's here is, I think, important for people to understand is we focus so much of it at the federal level, Rick, but now we're seeing it at a county board of elections. And what we're getting to is exactly that. It's not just the whiteboard itself and the Twitter users there, but we requested, the email exchange about those users. Why were you tracking them? And what were you, so what if you were tracking that you didn't like what they were saying? What were you then reporting to them? We saw Adam Schiff's office going to Twitter saying, shut down this account, take these persons down. Now we've seen Twitter change a bit under Elon Musk, to say the least. We have places like Rumble where we know we're not going to be censored. So we're seeing platforms now, but the governments, not just the federal government, Rick, but even a county board of elections believes they've got this somehow power to go after free speech.
And look, they are getting this aggressive because the media is not pushing back against them. But I want to tell you, Jordan, when we were fighting for every vote to be counted back after the 22 election, Kerry Lake, Abe Hamadeh were running, and we were counting all of the votes. We had a phone call with the attorney for Maricopa County elections. And on that phone call, it was shocking to me because the attorney actually said to us, hey, you've got all these people on Twitter that are harassing us. Can you push back and tell them to stop or to delete their tweets? And I immediately thought, why are you watching Twitter when you're supposed to be counting votes? Get off social media. Who cares what the public is saying to you? These people are so overly sensitive. They're monitoring what comments are being said on social media. Think about that. Instead of counting votes, they were concerned with comments.
Yeah, I mean, if we find out that this whiteboard existed and this is where they're spending their time and resources, taxpayer resources on, Rick, I mean, I guess to your point, they have a job to do. It's not supposed to be a partisan job. And the basis of it is, we've got to be able to trust that our elections are that every vote is going to be counted, that they are free and they're fair, and that the same rules apply to everybody, and we know what the rules are, and they're going to be enforced, and you win some elections and lose some elections, you accept that, but it doesn't feel like we live in a moment where that's the case. And then when you see reports like this, and we're going to get to the bottom of it, we've filed, taken action, like you said, Ray, where they are spending their time, not their resources on making sure every vote's counted, but they're spending their time on tracking Twitter users they don't like.
Well, I hope that everybody who's listening to us that lives in Arizona can give us feedback on whether or not they were harassed by the state for social media. Did somehow they get audited? Did they get on a list? Did reporters call them? Was there a harassment because the government didn't like their comments? To have names on a whiteboard listed to say these are our enemies, these are the people that don't like what we're saying, is a real scary thing. And thank God for ACLJ to not only be watching Washington, D.C., but be watching capitals like Phoenix.
Rick, I want to talk to you, too. You were in Mar-a-Lago when the president gave his remarks after being arraigned in New York and facing the indictment there. Just to let people know, kind of, because I know you've spoken to President Trump, and just to give them some insight, because you were in the room. We saw I think his remarks, hit the right tone because it was a very serious moment. It was not just like a campaign rally, and a serious. I think he understands the seriousness of not just for himself, but for the implications this has on our entire U.S. government, our system of government that is based on the rule of law. But just your reaction from then spending time with the president after he went through that process that he never should have had to go through.
Look, I think that the president, he's articulated this, and he certainly has said this to me, that he realizes what's at stake here. This is not just about him. He's talked about the fact that he's standing in the way of what the government and the Biden administration is trying to do to people who dissent, people who don't believe the lines that are coming from our government, people who are fearful of the retribution. And so what President Trump is now very clear on is that he's standing in the way. They're after him, but they're really after all of us who dissent. So I would say that he understands it doesn't matter who in the future is going to be the Republican leader or the presidential nominee or the president. If you go against Washington, D.C., they are going to impeach you, raid your home, and indict you. President Trump sees that very clearly, and it's why there's massive amounts of people that were sitting on the sidelines who are now supporting President Trump and coming forward to say this is outrageous. He's raised more than $10 million in the last week. He's got independents coming forward. I met a guy who was a Democrat at Mar-a-Lago the other night who told me that he's a first-generation American, and he's never voted for President Trump. Last time he voted for Biden, but he sees what's happening. He sees the media parroting what's happening, and he's very nervous about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it did. It ignited, as you said, Rick, people realized, it's one thing. President Trump is uniquely in a position, I think, to even he took on the Washington machine. He's paying that price, like as you said, and in fact, what he's trying to say is, listen, I can pay that price, but they'll do this to you. And that's kind of, I tie it back into Arizona because, the New York DA is a county DA going after the former president and now leading candidate in the Republican primary. In the situation in Arizona, it is a county board of elections that we believe is tracking Twitter users instead of counting votes. I mean, all these issues, it goes to how far they have gone down this path of weaponization. Rick, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you for alerting us on Friday to that and working through the weekend on it with us so we can get that records request in. If we need to go to court to get that information, we will be prepared to do that. So just a reminder that our work is not just internationally and in Washington, D.C., in the capitals around the world. It's right in Maricopa County, where we filed today to get this information, because you should be allowed to be a dissenting voice, and your county board of elections shouldn't be tracking you. Support the work of the ACLJ. We can do all of that. We've got Rick on our team. We've got attorneys ready to do it because of your financial support of the ACLJ. Donate today at aclj.org. Double the impact of your donation. That's aclj.org. We'll be right back.
Another day, another story about people leaving California. But what might shock you is the number of people going to different states. Last year, 500,000 people went somewhere else.
The decline happened between April of 2020 and July of 2022, so hightailing it during the pandemic. Experts say that is responsible for speeding up California's population loss.
Where has the population gone? Florida and Texas combined, those states have gained more than 1.5 million people during that very same 2-year period.
California had more babies born here over the last 2 years than people who have died. This isn't about the birth and the death rate. So yes, to answer your question, this is mostly because people are choosing to leave.
Those decisions fueled partly by the pandemic. That includes new opportunities for people to work from home. Also, the high cost of living here in California.
Here's some of what you all had to say. There is no way someone can really get started in California now. The job market cannot keep pace with the costs of living here. I miss the beauty of California, though. Nothing quite like it. Someone else said, I retired 2 years ago. I'm leaving because the cost of living is high. I can go to Oklahoma and live better. My retirement will go a long way. And I am planning to leave California California has become overrun with lawlessness, crime, and the politicians don't care.
When people see the atmosphere, the culture around them, and particularly in Los Angeles and San Francisco, they see a spiral of lawlessness going on, where you have one person, for instance, walking, not running out of a CVS and stealing under $950. Then you'll have 3 people running out of a Walgreens, 80 people running out of a Nordstrom's. You have follow home robberies, smash and grab robberies, train robberies, and double-digit rise in violent crimes. That is the toxic mixture for people to leave the state and vote with their feet rather than stay.
News report as well. Congressman Jordan, the House Judiciary Chair, and again, this just goes to the elections that have consequences, and they can be very important. You know, we've got Congressman Comer as the Oversight Committee Chair. We have Congressman Jordan as the Judiciary Committee Chair. They have subpoenaed Mark Pomerantz. Remember, Mark Pomerantz was the former assistant district attorney in Manhattan who wrote that book with the legal theory that now Alvin Bragg has used, The People versus Donald Trump, on how, and he was one of the people investigating Trump and wanted to bring charges against Donald Trump. He actually left the DA's office to go write his book because he didn't believe they would bring charges against Donald Trump under his theory. And then they did. Well, now he's being subpoenaed to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. And Jim Jordan has still left the door open to subpoenaing Alvin Bragg as well, because they wrote a book about what they were going to do. That's not how law enforcement works. So I wanted to update you with that breaking news. As we get more information, we'll bring it to you, of course, as that develops, and we'll see how Mark Pomerantz responds through his attorneys. But he opened himself up to it. He wrote a book, and then they based the charges that President Trump was indicted with, which were so weak, off of the book, off the theories inside the book. And he initially quit because he thought Alvin Bragg wouldn't bring the charges. So he's now been subpoenaed, not requested, but subpoenaed to testify. I want to go to the phones, 1-800-684-3110. Roger in Oregon on line 1. Hey, Roger.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I listened to Mike Pompeo. While Ukraine is important, it needs to be resolved. To me, what is a much larger issue, which is a direct result of this war and our massive inflation, and is not getting the attention that is needed in the media, is that the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency is being replaced by the Chinese yuan in Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and now even Brazil. And this is really ominous for our future and our country. And this needs to be shouted loud and clear. It needs to have some daylight given to it. I'm really concerned.
Yeah, well, let me bring in Harry Hutchinson, our director of policy, and Harry's an economic expert. This is happening, Harry, and it's not getting the attention you said it should. With just, I think that people are just overwhelmed with news right now, and kind of bad news also, and then with what happened with President Trump. But this issue involving our currency, and he mentions a lot of those BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and of course China then pushing to say, hey, don't use that U.S. dollar as your reserve.
Absolutely. So this is a very, very important story, and it's one of the stories that the mainstream media has not covered adequately. I'm not convinced that they actually care about a story that could have long-term implications on the United States economy. Essentially, what China, Russia, Iran, to some extent, have done is that they have formed a new currency, the Chinese yuan, and essentially they have basically embraced South Africa, Brazil, other African countries as well, and Iran, and they are forming an alternative to the U.S. dollar. I am also convinced that the elitists who basically run the Biden administration, they don't care. They are asleep. They are focused on Ukraine, and their focus on Ukraine has deprived them of focusing on issues that are quintessentially important to the American people. And I believe that the Biden administration will continue down this pathway of ignoring an economic threat to the United States. And this threat could have wide implications for the value of the dollar. If the value of the dollar falls, what does that mean? It means that the cost of our imports will rise. And this could, in the long term, drive up inflation even more.
I wanted to talk to you, too, about one of the issues you follow closely is education in our country. And we're seeing some pretty staggering numbers out of California. With the size of California, even when they talk about, that people have left, it's usually big enough where you don't really see giant drops in population or, in this case, people in public schools. This is the first time we've seen a report like this. I mean, maybe since they've even been covering it. A public school enrollment has dropped by 40,000 students in just the last school year.
Absolutely. So California is an exemplar of cultural decline and the rise of the man and woman of lawlessness. And so this is driving people out of California. And to the extent that they're staying in California, they're taking their kids out of public schools. Why? Because public schools in California are focused really on three things: diversity, inclusion, and equity. They are not really concerned about learning. So even though there's been a devastating decline with respect to the state, it's important to keep in mind where the center of decline is. And the the county of Los Angeles has lost 113,000 people from July 2021 to July 2022. And that's about 50% of the entire state's loss of population. And if you've been to Los Angeles recently, you recognize evident signs of decline. Crime rate is up, homelessness is up, social services are declining, and the level of pathology is going up, in part because criminals know in California that they can get away essentially with murder. And they can get away with murder in some cases, I think, even if it's caught on film.
Yeah, we saw the Cash App, the person who created Cash App. He's a former Square executive as well. And this is kind of rocking the Silicon Valley world. Bob Lee, he was in San Francisco, and he had recently moved out of San Francisco because of the violence, but had to return there for work. And he was stabbed to death. And just in what appears to be not targeted at all, but just a person who he was walking on the street and stabbed to death.
Absolutely. So people are apprehended in California, and they're not brought to justice. They are sent out on the street to reoffend. In addition to which, there's a huge problem in the public schools. The public schools are openly hostile, for instance, to Christianity, but they openly embrace, at least in my opinion, paganism. And so paganism has reemerged in American culture, as Jonathan Cahn warned in his book, The Return of the Pagan Gods. And so I think this has become a huge problem, and it's becoming a widespread problem in blue states throughout the country. And so parents are rightly fleeing this disaster.
We didn't get to go to yet, but the hostility in Maine, where there was a big school choice victory at the Supreme Court, how they're trying to circumvent that victory by saying, you know what, but you've got to adopt this anti-discrimination policy that would make it impossible for Christian schools to qualify. I mean, so this hostility towards, even when they lose, very clearly, they try to circumvent because the teachers' unions and because their ideology. It's not really about what's best for the students or what the parents want for their kids. So again, we'll get into more of that. Thanks, Harry, for all your updates there. Support the work of the ACLJ. Donate today at aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We have a matching challenge this month. You can double the impact of your donation. That's at aclj.org. We will talk to you tomorrow.